They, awesome.
Hey, welcome to Kitchen Table Conversations with Multicultural Family Hub. I'm Chessie.
I'm Andre.
And we have such a wonderful podcast today. I'm so excited. We have our first guest, and she's the best guest. So we're going to have her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm so honored to be here. So my name is Myrna Perez, and I know Chessie from a very long time ago, which was undergrad. And I'm now a scholar and a writer, and I'm fortunate to be an associate professor at Ohio University, where I live in these beautiful hills with my family. So I spend my days either in a library or like in a field tromping around.
The best.
Yeah.
Great places.
Myrna is both a brilliant human in an academic way and an amazing friend. And I did the math, and we've known each other for 25 years. And
that's true.
A long time.
That's a really long time.
You've known each other for an adult, like an adult person's.
Yeah.
You know.
Like our friendship could rent a car.
Yeah. There's a lot of things you can do. Your friendship has graduated maybe graduated college. You're like me, it took a little longer. But yeah. Well, can I tell one of my favorite before we jump in? Can I tell one of my favorite multicultural family stories?
Yes.
Myrna.
Yes.
Okay. Side note. So Myrna and her family were visiting with us in Northern California. I don't know if you remember this, and we went on a hike. Now it's just Myrna and I. So
yeah.
Our three kids, Chessie and I's three kids, who look physically like they could be a lot of different things, and then Myrna and her kids, who also look like they could be, a lot of different things. So we all go on this hike, and so it's me and Myrna and how many kids was that? Five
It was
kids?
5. Yeah.
And the trail to this hike is very, very small, and it is in a predominantly rural white area. And I
think I was carrying Garnet, my youngest. Like I think he was small enough that I like had him in a pack. Yeah.
Yeah. So the range would be like, if you didn't know us, you'd be like, oh, these two people have kids from 10 to small enough to carry in a pack. And we're walking in the I just remember the people passing us and watching them process what was going on was like, it was like the most fun I think I've ever had from like a sociological standpoint, because they were just like looking at Myrna, looking at like trying to
figure out like how did all of these children, but also like, yeah, that makes sense. Like they're all kind of ambiguously
who belongs to who, and wait a minute, how are there so many in that
why do they all look similar ages?
There's like 3 that are the same size. Like how did that work? Yeah. Well, you confused it with you already have the twins, right? And so then it's like
yeah, and so
confusing.
The math isn't mathing, and then I just remember that was just like I don't even think we hiked that far, because kids, like you said, you're like, we're gonna hike a mile, and after like 10 minutes they're like, yeah, we're done. But it was like one of the most fun hikes I've ever had, because it was just, like hilarious watching people process in an open space with like their mouths kind of like, and that look of like, I don't want to stare at you, but I have to stare at you
but I have to figure out what's going on here. And someone said something to us. Don't you remember? There was an older woman who was like, "You've been really busy."
You're right.
And I think I just said like, yeah, because I am busy.
That's when we both realized like, we don't have a sign on our chest saying, here is how, hey, we're not together. These are her kids. These are you know what I mean? And it's like YouTube.
Yeah, like our blue-eyed spouses are not currently with us.
Exactly. So I have a solution to this though. Next time we ever do this, we're just gonna I'll wear a shirt with like Chessie's face on it. Shirt with Seth's face on it, and then it will give people all the
like there's more here. Like if you're wondering, like if Indy is confusing you with her blue eyes.
It was just like it's like one of my favorite moments in nature.
Yeah.
Because it was and then you've been very busy.
Yeah.
Good.
Anyway, we should probably talk about other stuff, but that's great. Okay, so I want to start off with a question. And before I launch that question at you, I kind of want to give a context for when we talk about culture, what our framework is here.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the simplest way I look at it is, and this isn't a concept I came up with, it's one that was introduced to me, but I think it's so amazing, I kind of keep using it, is wherever there are two people in a room, culture is that third thing, or cultures are that third thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I have a question for you, but I want to break it into three parts because it's a larger one. And so the first part is looking back on your life, and let's start with being a kid, or a child, whatever that spans for you. What was the third things in the room? What were the cultures present in your childhood years?
Yeah, that I like that way of talking about culture, that third thing. I mean, I think the simplest thing I would say is that um uh I would say like immigration was like the big framing experience of my childhood, but I wouldn't have been able to describe it that way as a kid.
Mm.
So my father was an immigrant from the Philippines, like that whole side of the family. I grew up in a Filipino immigrant context. And then I also grew up in San Diego, um, just about 20 minutes from the border with Mexico. So just north of the border where Tijuana is. So that context also of being in a like a border city, a border
Mhm.
community
Mhm.
shaped everything about the way I experienced as a kid, but I didn't have the language for it. Like I remember as like a 7-year-old thinking, oh, there's a rule that street names have to be in Spanish.
Mm.
Like I just thought that was like a rule somewhere because all of the street names were in Spanish and no one said that to me.
Mm.
It just was what I experienced and intuited. And I think like a lot of kids, if things aren't said to you explicitly, you just like make sense of the world. So I was like, oh, okay, like street names are in Spanish. You know, my Filipino family like always eats in the garage, and half the people are speaking in Tagalog. And my, kind of white American family doesn't do that. Like you just sort of make sense of it as a kid. So if you had asked me as a kid, I wouldn't have said that. But then as an adult, that's like the simplest way that I would describe that experience. And especially now that I've lived in other regions of the United States. So now I've lived in the Midwest for almost a decade. I lived in New England for almost a decade. I lived in Texas for a couple of years. I think especially that second, being living in a border city is something
Mm.
now in contrast, I realize like that was really a major part of what I experienced because it's quite different from being in the middle of the in the middle of Appalachia, which is where I live now.
No.
What are some Appalachian street names that you were like, oh, that's a new one?
Oh my goodness. So it's a I just say them wrong all the time. And
I'll just let
actually,
it rip. Come
yeah,
on.
you just like, and the thing that's interesting actually is like there's a town near here that looks like it's pronounced Chauncey. Like there's a Chauncy. But you say it Chancey. And somebody told me the story. I don't know if it's true, but it feels true that um union workers, like coal mining union workers, started calling it Chancey so that they would know who was like like who was from not the town. It was like a way of kind of identifying like who is like in the union or part of the town versus not. Um, so
Wow.
yeah, so there's a lot of stuff like that where you're like, oh, that looks like, this town in Scotland, I might pronounce it this way, but actually it's said like this here. And you can
Yeah.
kind of tell like it's like that Nevada thing, right? Like you've never met a West Coaster who calls it Nevada. And so as soon as somebody says that, you're like, oh, you're from New Jersey. I could tell.
Yeah. Well, it's like if you come to Savannah, you say Chatham
No,
County.
no, Chatham.
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 I said
Yeah.
Chatham
H is not.
and immediately was like,
The
no.
H is
No.
there, but is not recognized. It's Chatham. And so yeah. And you're
Yeah,
like,
so it's like a real like insider outsider,
yeah,
like
me.
kind
You're
of
like,
thing.
no,
Mm,
that was a slip.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Um,
yeah, that's and so I just want to touch on the thing and one of the major things that were in the room was like you said was that the geographic place of where you grew up was located near a border, but that was like you said that wasn't something that was often necessarily talked about or like was openly discussed of how that was influencing everything from the street signs to I assume economics, food, all the other things that encompassed your life, your
oh
childhood.
yeah, entirely. I remember when I was in college, so Chelsea and I both went to Westmont College, this private liberal arts Christian college, which I'm sure you've probably talked about on the podcast already. But and I remember having lunch with a new professor. Like you could take a professor to lunch, and this particular professor was he's English, he was from London or something, and we were just like chatting over lunch, and I remember somebody asked him, "Oh, what has really stood out to you, like moving to Santa Barbara or Southern California?" And in retrospect, I think it was sort of like I'm impressed that he said this. He says, "Oh, it's really clear who does what kinds of labor here, who does what kinds of work." And he's like, "It's really striking to me that all of the people who are working in the dining commons or who do service work are Hispanic, maybe Mexican in particular, but Hispanic, and people who are being served are white." And it was like glass breaking in my mind. I think I was 18. I was like, oh, of course, like that is the whole world I've always lived in. But to hear someone say it so explicitly, I'd never heard someone say it so explicitly. So I intuited that always, right? It was just like, and my own experience, even though I'm not, of Mexican descent, I very much look like I could be. My last name is Perez because, as I always like say to people, the Spanish also conquered the Philippines. So my last name is Perez. They were very busy. Yeah. And so in many, many contexts, people's first assumption is that I'm Latina, which is a totally reasonable assumption. And so there were contexts at Westmont where people would assume that I was doing service work if I were dressed in a particular way, and so, it was something that, Jesse, your face, you're like, well, which also, like, I mean, on the one hand, I feel like you could feel aggrieved, but also like, no one is above service work too. So it's complicated, but yeah, I think that moment I always remember as like the first moment maybe in my life that someone said it so explicitly. And what that was, maybe 25 years ago. And I can hear his voice, like, and I can picture what table we were sitting at when he said that to me, or, to us.
In that context of Westmont, which was like a primarily like white population, and having those moments, did you feel othered in that space, or were you just like, or did you just like move on with it? Or like, was there some sort of explanation that you made, in those moments?
I mean, I do think I did feel othered. I mean, it was the first time I think that I had more explicit conversations with people saying, I forget the language that they used at Westmont. There was like it wasn't like a diversity office, but there was something like that. I don't remember the term they used for it. I think they might have used the term multicultural. Like, I think I got a multicultural scholarship, possibly. And so there'd be conversations about, uh, oh, you're probably interested in these things because you're ethnic or you're diverse. I think it was the first time that lots of people expected me to represent a point of view, a diverse point of view or an ethnic point of view.
Is that why you tried out basketball?
Sorry, what?
Is that why you tried out for the basketball team?
Oh my gosh. Well, no, I mean,
Andres,
I want to play basketball with Myrna. That's why I'm doing this.
the first thing that I connected with Myrna over was like Jane Austen and tea parties.
Yeah.
And so like deep in your soul, having like scones at heart, right?
Yeah. And you know what's so interesting about that, Chessie, is I think about, so you're asking like, the cultures that were there, but the other culture that was there for me as a kid is the culture I consumed, which was largely British, largely English, and being drawn to that. And it's interesting as an adult because now that I do a lot of post-colonial studies, post-colonial theory, realizing that like you're drawn to those things because you're interested in them, but you're also drawn to them because of the ways that colonialism creates these desires that you have for certain kinds of things, right? So I was thinking about, so my daughter really loves The Secret Garden, which I loved as a kid. And, for people who might not be familiar, The Secret Garden is all about this little girl who's growing up in India, and she's like really like an unpleasant child. And then she moves to the moors of Yorkshire, and it's all about how like the moors of Yorkshire and this garden like help her to be a healthier child. And also like I think her cousin is like ill also, and they all like go in the garden and they find a secret garden and they like make the roses bloom again. And my daughter loves it. And so she like both listens to it and has read it, but it's also the centerpiece of this really, really wonderful post-colonial theory of race book, one of my favorite ones from 1995 called Race and the Education of Desire by Ann Stoler. And it's not just about the secret garden, there's lots and lots of stuff in it, but there's a piece where the author analyzes the secret garden kind of at length and talking about how it it demonstrates all the anxieties that European colonists had about the ways that their children would be changed by living in India, but in particular the ways that their children might be like sort of sexualized by contact with their native um, like nannies and caretakers. And like she talks about all these scenes in the book where you see like the child is presented as like being almost like malformed by her experiences in India, and she has to go to the healthy wars in order to have this experience. Anyway, that's a really long way of saying of like it's really strange to be like, oh, I loved these like British things as a kid and I love to share them with my daughter because I feel so connected to them, and I also realize that there are like really specific reasons I love them, you know. And I don't know, I guess you could decide like, oh, I'm not going to let her read that because I don't want her to experience colonialism, but then you realize like, oh, you have to experience colonialism, it is everywhere. And so
It's
maybe there's less
really
space.
amazing. You bring this up because I mean I'm 42 and I'm right now in the process of really, part of my family's from Jamaica
Oh,
and realizing how deeply, deeply impacted the things that part of my family loves, the things they value, the things that we deem as good, the things that I mean everything from food to education to all of it is absolutely influenced by the British colonial and the British education system that every one
yeah.
of the generation before me went through, hands down. And so I'm right there on the journey too. And I think that's going to be more of a podcast we're going to dive into today. But it's like when you see it too, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, that's why I am attracted to that, or that's why I did that.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Soccer was always more interesting to me than American football or other things. I mean, it was just like inch or track and field or cricket, like all these things that
yeah.
weren't even available to me in Atlanta, Georgia. But it was like that's what those were like. Wow, that's a good sport.
And you feel like that the second part of the title of the book, The Education of Desire, I love it so much because it's like helping you to think about like you just use the word attracted, right? It's like we think of attraction as maybe like inherent or natural. You might even use the word biological, like, oh, I'm just drawn to this. And she really argues like desire, both in like a sexual sense, but also just like desire, like what you feel an affinity to is something that is cultivated in you. It's educated and
Mm.
sometimes deliberately by a colonizer, right? And sometimes just sort of structurally by the like colonial structures of like I think about, I mean, this gets kind of intense, but I think about like people will do these studies about like, which race, quote unquote, race groups are drawn to which kind of race groups and who's dating who. And it's always presented as this like, oh, people just happen to be attracted to these
Mhm.
particular kinds of groups. I'm like, no, it's like formulated, right? Like what we desire is cultivated in us.
Mhm. Mhm.
I guess then I also think though, then like if you realize that, then you also think, well, you could also cultivate other kinds of desires, right? Either like individually or like as a family. But it's hard. It's hard
Yeah.
Do you
too.
think
Yeah.
it's all cultivated or that we come in with like things that are innately things that we love and sometimes they're layered so much by culture that you never find them again or
Mm,
you like at some point because I personally feel like I'm peeling off layers and being like, "Oh, I've actually always loved this thing." And like
mhm.
that's actually who's in there because I said, oh, like scones are in your soul. Probably not, right? Maybe they are, but
I
maybe
don't know.
not, right? Like you're
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
like maybe that is like all this cultivated piece. Yeah, do you think that there are things that are just like part like what we come in with and then it's layered or like a both and?
Oh, it's like such a deep and hard question, Chessie. I was just reading, if you can imagine this, I was just at the library this morning reading a book about development as a science, which is like the science of like how you go from the moment of fertilization to the adult form, like what's the process that happens. And it's so deeply fascinating. Um, I mean, I tend to think it is a lot of cultivation, because even when you're talking about on a biological level, it's really about even if you're talking about like in a genetic way, it's what gets turned on and off, sort of less like what the starting material is. So let me see how this is. I think that um, it is a lot of cultivation, but it doesn't mean that it is just like random or capricious, or that you can undo it also. So like if you think about, I don't know, like the way that a tree grows, like it's really influenced by context, but sort of once you're down a certain road with the way the tree has gone, it's not like you can reverse it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
fascinating.
Yeah, so I think that we're really drawn to this idea that there's something that would be that way no matter what we would do, right? I think when people are asking the question, like, is something genetic or inherent, sort of what they mean is like, no matter what action you would take, it would always have been that way. It's a sort of, it's a question of counterfactual, right? And it also means that your question is like, how much did my own agency or choice influence this? And I think there are some things that we're drawn to the idea that we don't have agency over, right? I think with parenting, sometimes we're drawn to that idea, right? Like it doesn't matter what I'm doing. They always would have been stubborn, or they always would have been excitable, or they always, whatever it is. And other things, I think we're drawn to the idea of agency, right? Like I have control over this. I can, optimize my life or my time or whatever, whatever. And I think we tend to use the language of nature and biology when we don't want to feel like, when we don't want to like own our agency or own our responsibility.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean we're wrong. I think about that a lot, but yeah. So I didn't actually answer your question, Chessie, because it's one that I think about kind of on a daily basis, and I didn't have a good
I
answer
want to know what
to
time
it.
you were at the library this morning, to be perfectly honest. What time was it? Come on.
Oh, well, I get up very early.
Yeah, but what
So
time were you reading about that?
so I got there when it opened at 8. But that was late. I was like, I get up at 5:30. And so I was like, oh, I gotta wait for the library to open,
That's
So
awesome. She's like, I'm gonna just dive into some light reading right now. Um,
Oh yeah.
that's actually a good segue because I kind of broke this question. We started with your childhood, and let's jump. I know we're jumping over a lot of stuff, but I think because it's gonna kind of get to parenting. But then let's jump to young adult, college, post-college, where you're not a parent, we're not parent, you're not a parent yet. What was in the room then for you? And you could talk about it on a professional level or on a personal level. I know you talked about you lived in Boston, you lived in Texas, you're obviously in the Midwest now. What was in the room then for you in terms of cultures that were there?
Yeah.
And how were those, and sorry, and on this point, at that time, how did the things in the room influence your decisions, whether it be professionally, personally, or just life-wise?
Yeah. So I think if I were to try to like describe it succinctly, the way I kind of think about um that sort of era of my life. So I went from college to grad school. So I did a doctorate in the history of science.
Hmm.
And then after that, I did a postdoc in feminist and gender studies. And the way I think about those transitions is
At
that,
Harvard.
oh yeah, at Harvard.
Sorry. If I went to Harvard, y'all, that's all you would hear. I would have
Uh,
I would just throw it out there randomly. I'd be like, we talking about Harvard? No? Okay. But go.
I mean, recently I've been like, oh, okay, maybe Harvard isn't like the worst possible thing in the world. But so I did my doctorate at Harvard in the history of science. And I think the way that I think about it is I left Westmont and I left a Christian context really with this desire to study and do scholarship to make the world better. I mean, I think at the time I would have described it like for the kingdom of God, right? In that kind of religious language. It was like my friends were going into the Peace Corps, they were going into like doing sustainable, agriculture work. They were like going to become lawyers to help with immigration policy. And I was like, oh, this is my thing like that, right? Like I have to believe that if I'm going to do this scholarship, which is often by yourself, I feel like it can feel kind of self-indulgent, maybe like you're just looking at things you're interested in. I have to believe that it is for like the good. And then I went to Harvard, and that was sort of it was sort of trained out of me on some level for those years, because there what I learned is like, oh, what you want is power. Like you want intellectual power, you want material power, you want social power. Like you want to have people think that you are important and interesting and accomplished. And I think that so in that context, like learning like what power is and how to get it, that's a lot of what I learned at Harvard. I mean, I learned like, archival methods, and I like studied German for a semester, but like power was like what I learned.
That was the third thing in the room.
It was the third thing
Hey,
in
we're
the
all
room.
here. We're not here. We're not here. Yeah, there's going to be a college education, but you're coming out of Harvard. It's like we're here because we now know how to maneuver and gain access
Yeah.
to things that have influence, that have power, and that
And
have
it
yeah.
And it was really, it was, I would describe it as a culture shock, because I went into it thinking, oh, like I love, I mean, like I love scholarship, like I love reading, I love being in archives. I went into it thinking like, oh, I'm going to be with other people who they also love this and also had come out of a education context that was, I would describe it as more nurturing, right? It was like people who were like professors who are interested in like nurturing your intellectual interests and gifts. And I should say, like, I had really wonderful mentors who helped me through all of this. And I would credit my advisor in particular, who was really wonderful. But just like the broader context of it, it took me a while to be like, oh, this isn't just like a place where like a lot of smart people love learning. This is like a place where like global politics are forged, right? Like this is like one of the centers of global power, both in terms of like wealth, but also influence. Like people come in and out of this place for very different reasons. And I mean, there's obviously lots of people who are like, I don't know, like in love with like 13th century instruments or whatever. But there's a lot of other things going on besides that. And then
How, oh,
oh
sorry.
yeah,
I was
no,
gonna ask,
please.
how did you square, maybe not square might not even be the right word, but like, how did you blend those, or kind of like, what was your journey like coming from like a Christian female context, which is like you are to be of service, like having that, right, to this more masculine, like you to be an agent of change, you need to have power. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how did those two cultures like square off, and like where did you kind of land with those two, or like what evolved?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think I joke sometimes, mostly to my spouse, that I think I was like a very good undergrad, and I think I've been a good like faculty member and postdoc. But I mean, I got the doctorate. I think I did well, but it was hard, right? Like I didn't understand that every moment was a performance, right? Like every time you spoke in class, it was a performance. Every time you asked a question in a seminar, it was a performance. Um, I didn't realize that these weren't spaces that I could trust to think well of me,
Wow.
no matter what I did, right? And so I think that uh, I think one character trait I developed then is I'm very persistent in the face of failure and difficulty. And so when things were difficult, I just threw myself at them, like kind of endlessly, So if it's like this isn't going through, or something's not making sense, or I'm having a hard time like putting together my dissertation proposal, or I'm getting a no from this. Um, yeah, I just like would throw myself at it over and over and over again.
Where
And
did that come from?
I don't know.
I
Maybe
mean,
it's one of
that's,
those inherent things.
I don't know, that's incredible, because I feel like that is such a key to success, like to keep going, that you were like, oh, because I feel like in listening to your story, I'm getting like upset at like this like innocence preserving Christian context, that like everyone has your best interest at heart, and like you're just kind of like thrown to the wolves at Harvard, and I'm like getting pissed, right?
Oh.
Because I'm
But
like,
yeah, and it's also
and but you were like, no, okay, so this is the game, so I'm just gonna like keep going. I
I'm just
think
gonna
that's
keep going. Yeah.
incredible.
And maybe that did, I mean, even after actually being there, I really have a tendency when I get a no, especially in a professional context, to just be like, I mean, nothing fires me up more like than getting a no for something, where I'm just like, I'm gonna effing show you what I can do. I I maybe that developed that in me, that
Yeah.
sense of like, all right, I'm just gonna I just don't take the no. But the thing I was going to say is that the thing that I think it weeded out of me for that time was any kind of sense of scholarship for a good, right? It was really about scholarship as demonstration of excellence and power. Um, and then I think sort of somewhat contingently, I ended up doing a feminist and gender studies postdoc afterwards at Rice, in their Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, which now, I mean, I'm a professor of gender studies. I've been doing this now for more than a decade. It sounds like, oh, obviously you did that, but I didn't do anything like that as an undergrad or a grad student. You know, I will tell my grad students, like, I didn't take a women's studies course till I was a postdoc. Like, I didn't, I didn't do anything with gender studies. It's one of those things where people are like, well, probably you did that because you were a woman. I was like, no, I mean, I did the opposite of it. But um, some of the things that I was studying, I was looking at the relationship between evolutionary biology in the 1970s and creationism. And then I was also looking at the relationship, I ended up looking at the relationship between evolutionary biology and feminism. And that history all became the subject of my first book, which came out last year, which
What's
is
the name?
called Criticizing Science. You can get it wherever books are sold.
Yes, go get
Yes,
it.
go get it.
Criticizing science.
But it was because of that work that I got interested in feminists who were criticizing biology in the 1970s. And so when I was applying to jobs, I applied kind of all over the place. I applied to things in history of science, I applied to things in religious studies, and then I applied to things in feminist studies, which I wasn't really super honestly like qualified to do that. But this postdoc at Rice, which is a very prestigious postdoc in feminist studies, I think they happened to be interested in somebody who had a lot of knowledge about science and history of science. And one of the things about my program at Harvard in particular is there's a really emphasize, like, you're doing history of science, but it's very technical. Like, you come out knowing a lot of technical stuff about biology. Like, I did a year in a biology lab. So, I'm not a biologist, but you're really close to the science. And it was in those 2 years that I feel like I had a kind of almost like spiritual reawakening of this academic context where it was an interdisciplinary space that had a really long history of thinking about scholarship and activism and what's the relationship between the academy and communities, or how do we break those things down, how do we do non-hierarchical forms of scholarship, like always problematizing this hierarchical relationship between the academy and other kinds of communities, and also just like this assumption from the beginning that like the only reason you would do scholarship is because you want to make the world a better place. There isn't another reason to do it. And so just being in that context for a couple of years, I felt like it was almost like I was reaching back to Westmont in a funny sort of way of like, oh, like this is giving me in a totally different kind of vocabulary, almost like permission to say out loud that I want to do this because I care about the world, or I care about things being in a particular way. And so that postdoc, even though it was only a couple of years, was really, really formative for me, intellectually, scholarly, like personally. And that I think it like gave me a way to talk about doing things for the kingdom of God without using that theological language, if that makes sense, to that like confining kind of way of thinking about it.
Well, what you said is so interesting to me because you essentially went from one culture that you said, you couldn't trust this culture to think well of you if you didn't behave, act in a certain way, to another, both academic cultures, but also regionally, two different parts of the United States of America.
Mhm.
Where's Rice again? Inform
Texas.
people.
It's in
Texas.
Houston.
Houston. Okay, so you go from Boston and now you're in Houston. Two different cultures, two different
Yeah.
regions. And one culture you felt like you couldn't trust this culture to think well of you. But it sounds like in Houston and Rice, even though you're still doing academic work, still rigorous, it sounds to me like something about that culture allowed Myrna to trust, like, I can engage in this and people will think well of me. And not even think well of me. I'm okay here. It's safe for me to like show up like this here.
Yeah, and some of it I think is, your own it's hard when you express something about a culture, you're also talking about your own development and your own age, right? So like going from being a grad student to a postdoc for anyone is a real transformation in terms of the way that people perceive you and talk to you. Going from a postdoc to faculty, going from junior I mean, academia is really like, it's very hierarchical in terms of like where you are in your generation. Um, so I think a lot of people would probably express like they felt more assured as a postdoc than as a grad student.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. I think that it just seemed like there were so many more things on the table for possibility in that space. And what has been very interesting, and I would say sort of healing in a way, is that I'm still very, very much engaged in history of science as a discipline and as a community. And a lot of people who I either went to grad school at Harvard with, or we were sort of like the same generation and cohort, so went to grad schools at like neighboring programs. One thing about the history of science is it tends to be at very elite universities. I'm not exactly sure why. Well, I mean, I do know why, but that's like a longer story. So like places like Princeton or UPenn or Wisconsin-Madison, I'm very good friends with and collaborate with people who came out of those programs. And so a lot of other people, I think, have gone on similar journeys in other spaces. And we've sort of come back to thinking about how do we reimagine our work in this space. So some of my closest friends and collaborators were all jointly writing a tarot card deck together. Actually, I should say we've written it, like we've got the draft. And the tarot card deck it's called the Beyond Knowledge Tarot Card Deck. It's not yet available for purchase, but it will be at some point. And part of I hope that I'll be expressing this properly for my collaborators, but part of it is for us to think about like, well, there was something about history of science that we really valued, that it is this discipline that helps you to see ways that people know the world and different kinds of ways that people know the world. And the kind of like strengths and kind of complementary relationships between ways of knowing. So, the way of knowing of like your mind, where you like look at things rationally versus like how you might know something through your body, right? And so the tarot card deck is meant to give people kind of like an experiential way of engaging with some of those ideas. So that's a long way of saying of like, I don't want to like in my story be like, oh, history of science was the worst and I've left it all behind. I think it's also interesting in your life to think about, is there reparative work you can do for a space that was difficult for some reason, either for you or for other people? Sometimes there's not, right? It's like sometimes there's nothing reparative to be done about a culture. But for me, at least, I found reparative work in history of science.
That's awesome.
I have to say that I didn't really understand even I still don't have like a great understanding of all the history of science, right? And like what people are looking at. But I remember having some early conversations with you when you were first doing when you were at Harvard and being like, wait, this is what you're talking about? And the conversation that I think stuck with me was I had never even conceived of like, oh, someone invented science.
Yeah.
And that like we are looking at like how we came up with the way that we do things and who the people were. Again, like what was the culture of these like white British men that were creating the tactics that meant this is science and this is trustworthy. And like, to me, it was like kind of this like moment thinking about all of those things. And even, yeah, and you like the work that you've done, I think is so fascinating because you're looking at like, okay, and then this is how those methods have like played out in culture, in time, in policy, in like real life. And do you have like a way to explain history of science that is more than that?
I mean, that was a beautiful explanation of history of science, I would say. I mean, I think that I guess the way that I would describe it, I really love the way you described it, Chessie. But I think one of the ways I would think about it is, on the one hand, like if you just look at the history of people studying the natural world, what they thought they were doing, the methods they were using, the reasons that they thought it was trustworthy have really changed over time. Our ideas about the natural world have changed dramatically. If as soon as you start getting into the history of science, you're like, wow, there's so much more that's going on than just like, let's say something like the scientific method and people like apply it properly through time. I mean, one of the things I'll like to say about the scientific method is no one thought they were using the scientific method until like the really late 1800s, early 1900s, and somehow we like discovered quote unquote gravity before that, right? So like it can't be the case that
This is the only way.
yeah, but so there's one way of thinking about the history of science where you're really looking at like the influence of culture and what we say is science like changes over time, and so it's sort of a way of destabilizing the authority of science. Like it's not the only way of knowing, it's not the only way of understanding things. But the flip side of it is there are forms of knowing that have made it so that we understand things that we didn't before, and also that we make things and can do things that we didn't before. So, like in the work that I do, I'll talk to my students, I'm like, we can fertilize, we can create an embryo outside of a human body. We couldn't do that before, right? So, on the one hand, you're like, oh, lots of things are ways of knowing and lots of ways of engaging with the world, and like lots of things you might trust. And also there's this thing that like creates new things in the world. And how does it do that? And how do we engage with that? That's like, I think like what I I feel like is like the challenge of the history of science is like both saying like, oh, science isn't whatever you might think of science, it's not the only way of knowing the world. And also whatever you might think about science, there is a set of things that we've done as humans that make new things and make new forms of power in the world. There's a short documentary film that I was a part of that I think you all would be interested in, and I think your listeners. It was put out by AAAS, so the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, which is the main like professional scientific organization in the United States. They publish science, like the big
The magazine.
the magazine, yeah. And they did a documentary series that was called Science as Mastery, and I think the subtitle was something like Race and Power or something. It was looking at it was talking about the history of race science. And I'm like one of the talking heads in it, and there's some other talking heads. And I think I say something in it about just this point of like, you know, science has this history of violence, and it also has this ability for us to like know ourselves better and to know the world better. And like how do you kind of like I think I actually use language like how do you kind of like wrestle with the temptation of that kind of power, right? Like that if you really do have more power to know and to do, like it's also a temptation to control and enact violence. Yeah.
I feel like what you're describing in like the history of science piece is like so much of, I feel like with multiculturalism too, where you're like, I am constantly holding these two things at the same time, where
Mm-hmm.
I am this and I am that and I am both, and being able I feel like the both and is the most important piece typically, is like, yes, we have this like history and methods, and they have been harmful and not always helpful. And
Mm-hmm.
also like all this creation and good stuff. Do you feel like in some ways, just thinking about what I know of your story, that there is that within you? You know what I mean? Where it's like you have both of those pieces, where it's like within, as a multicultural individual, do you feel like you're better at holding those tensions just like because of who you are, like how you came into the world?
Oh, I love that question. I think, yeah, I think a lot about how our different bodily experiences can be almost like gifts that we can give to one another, right? It's like, you know, I have this embodied experience of being unintuitive to people racially. Just like when people meet me, they're like, I'm not quite sure what you are. I could make some guesses. If they know my last name, they sort of try to read it, but it's hard for people to put me into a category. And basically no one in my life has ever guessed like, oh, you seem like you're half Filipino and half like you know, Scotch Irish descent. And so I do think that like, you know, if I were like using kind of an acronym word, that kind of liminal, right? You're sort of in between, but also like it's hard for people to read you. You just sort of exist kind of not in one space or the other. I feel like I kind of live in that space, like intellectually, when I think about like the philo I write a lot more philosophically than I used to. When I think about like the philosophy that I'm drawn to, it's like the philosophy that's like really willing to like sit right in the contradiction and be like, we're like, and to sit in it for a really long time. And I do think that I'm drawn to that. And I also think that one of the reasons I'm drawn to that is that I think when you sit with contradictions, you're less interested in the question of like, are you right about something? You know, like I think a lot of times we can be interested in like, do I have the right answer, you know, politically or for parenting, or, you know, is science the best way of knowing the world? Is it religion? And I feel like if you really sit in the contradiction, you kind of, it's almost like an exercise in like humility in a way, right? Where you're like, I'm both going to sit with this. I'm not just going to like throw up my hands and not engage with it, but I'm also maybe going to set aside the question of like, how am I going to be the ultimate authority over the right answer to this, you know? And I think about it almost as more like, instead of saying to people like, when I think about the writing I do now, instead of me being like, oh, I figured out the answer, let me tell you it, it's more like an invitation into the sitting, right? It's like, I feel like sitting here has done something for me. Would you like to sit here with me and see if it does something for you also? Um, and you know, the answer might be no. Sometimes it is no, as I've experienced when I give talks. But sometimes it's yes, you know, and that's nice. Yeah.
I like personal opinion. I think it's a wiser, harder place.
Mm,
And it's a place that specifically the overculture of America does not like to be. We want you to have we are supposed to be giving you 5 ways to fix the problem. We are supposed to be like, it is either supposed to be this or this. You are Republican or Democrat. It is so binary.
yeah.
And so much of what we're talking about with multiculturalism is what I believe is a wiser space, is an older space,
Yeah.
a space that you can sit with all the pieces and, like you said, sit there and be like what are we gonna what's gonna come out of this? And it can be more individual in some ways, because like what you we can sit in the tension and then lean one way and the other person leans the other, and it's still okay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think a lot about I think a lot about listening, right? Like what makes it so that you can really listen to other people. And I think just as you were describing, right, as soon as you're able to, you know, say, oh, I've typed you, right? Like I know which political box I'm going to put you in, or I know which, you know, class box I'm going to put you in. It's so much harder to listen to someone, really, right? Because you're sort of filtering everything they say through what you have already decided about that grouping. And so I think, yeah, for me, it is sitting in the contradiction for what it might do for yourself. But I feel a little bit when I sit in contradictions, I feel like it makes it easier for me to listen to other people and to listen to them for a really long time without, you know, this is not me. This is like Thich Nhat Hanh, this like idea of deep listening, where you listen without formulating your response. You just listen. And I think it's also like you listen without needing to decide how you're going to understand or type or categorize, right? So um, I think I'll describe, for instance, to my students, I'll teach a lot of like womanist or Black feminist political thought, or Black political thought in my classes. And I'll have students who say like, you know, I don't know how to engage with this because I'm not Black. Like, what do I do with this, right? Like, I feel like if I read it, then maybe I'm appropriating it, or if I claim it, I'm appropriating it, or if I don't read it, then I'm ignoring it. Like, what do I do? And I found for my students and myself, I'm like, you can listen to it. Like, you don't have to decide if it's right or wrong. You don't have to make any decisions about it. You can just listen to it. And so there are some, I think for myself, right? Like I would never claim to be a Black political thinker. I would never claim that world for myself. I think of myself as a lifelong listener to that. And I feel like it's a way of describing almost like a bodily orientation to something, right? And then you could, when you listen to something, you're influenced by it, right? Like it can change you, but you're not like in charge of making decisions about it or like speaking for it or like, being the representative of it.
Mhm.
Um, so
Yeah.
at least I find that helpful. But this is the
Uh,
thing about being a professor is you have ideas and you kind of try them out with your students and you see see if they're like, yeah, this works, or they're like, no, no, that doesn't work at all.
Wow,
Love
I
that.
feel like this has been such a good journey, and I want to kind of circle us back to our hike. So you took
Oh
us
yeah.
from your childhood, and now you went into kind of your professional career and the places and space you lived. But in in all of that, you're now also occupying the space of living in the Midwest and your parent in a relationship. What are the cultures in the room now? And
Mm.
specifically, how are those cultures influencing parenting for you as someone who has a multicultural identity, but also has kids?
Yeah, that's a I love circling it back. I mean, uh, I would say that one of the dominant cultures in the room for my children is that they live in a small college town,
Mm.
which means that they it's so Athens is quite small. It's 20,000 people when the students aren't here, and then there's another 20,000 students or 20,000 people when the students are here. And so what it means is that their experience of community is so much more intimate than mine was growing up. So, their babysitter will also be their camp counselor, who's the daughter of their elementary school principal, who also is babysitting their friends. It's like their best friend's mom is also their pediatrician. Like it's just these constant, their friend's dad is my chair. Like there's just these constant layers of connection. Um, and I think that that has really profoundly shaped my experience of parenting in ways I didn't expect. Like, I think I assumed that I would be thinking of myself as the primary influencer and decision maker for almost everything with my kids. And instead, it feels like incredibly more collective.
Mm.
So, you know, there are lots of people who I trust with my kids in ways I don't think I would have really imagined, both trust like with their bodily safety. We actually just got back. There's a group of families that we hike with every Sunday morning. And then this group of people, we just went for a camping trip together in West Virginia by a creek. And so there's this constant like other people are, they see your kid and it's like, oh, like, we said you weren't supposed to go on that rock, or like, hey,
Mm.
like, are you having smart hands, smart feet while you're climbing up that precipice over there? This sort of a thing. But then it's also trusting other people with like the kind of like moral and political development of your children, right? Of like, oh, these friends of ours are artists and filmmakers, or this one's an activist, and like just like sort of what people are introducing into your kids' lives. And so I guess maybe saying is like, I think I assumed that parenting would be about like me creating a kind of cohesive framework in some sense and like imparting it to my children. And instead it feels like I'm holding it like more loosely than I would have imagined.
Mm.
I feel like one example I would give is I was in Germany earlier this month for about a week, just me. And while I was away, my daughter had her first sleepover, like so the first time she slept over at somebody else's house. And I think I would have assumed like she's 7, like, people have really big feelings about this. Like some people are like, this is an important part of childhood, other people are really nervous about it, this or that. And the family who she stayed over, I referenced already, like the mom is her nurse practitioner, her primary care, like caregiver. And they're also like, very dear friends. We spent so much time with them. I'm just like, it felt so it didn't even feel like a decision really, right?
Mm.
It just felt so easy and intuitive in ways I didn't really think I could have imagined. And so this is a very long answer to your question, Andre, but I think that I don't think I could have imagined what parenting in a community would have been like. And the context that we live in has like grown this community to parent together. Um, so that I feel like less alone in parenting, I guess, than I would have assumed, and less like concerned with my own like authority, like morally, I guess, than I would have assumed, which I think is a good thing.
I think so too. I feel like that's such a blessing because that yeah, I'm like, how did you meet these people? How did you
It's fascinating because it ties back to the cultural influence that your work has had on you of being like,
Hmm.
I'm not here to be an authority. I'm not here to necessarily make the final judge. I'm here to listen. And so being
Yeah.
open in your work, but also being open in your parenting culture has allowed you to listen. And, you know, like you said, you're like, I'm not here to dictate all these things. I'm here to maybe say, yeah, that's a good opportunity. And go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah. And when there are people who, and even people who you are, maybe like politically aligned, or I mean, many people in this community that were in, one or the other of them are academics. So you have like things in common. You still think about things differently, right? Like you still are bringing lots of cultures to bear. And so people's intuitions will be different. And you're like, a lot of it for me is like rock climbing stuff where I don't, where they're like, oh, it's fine. And I'm like, okay, we're good. Like my
I'm not gonna look. I'm not
just,
gonna look.
and so my children are like way more confident physically than I was as a child because they just have this experience of like, oh, like I can, and we sort of have rules, kind of rules about that. Like one of our major rules is like, for the kids is like they have to be able to get up on whatever they're doing, so no one can give them a boost. Which seems like a simple rule, but it's actually really important, right? It's like
Especially
if you
makes you
can,
stronger.
yeah. But yeah, my kids do all kinds of stuff, like adventure wise, that I don't think I would have like intuitively. I would have been like, oh,
Is your
yeah.
family within the culture that you're not, are you viewed as a, well, let me ask you this. Do you identify as a multicultural family? And if so, are you viewed as that by your peer group or just the community at large? Or is it something that doesn't really come up? Or how does that, where are you at with that?
I think it does come up in part because of the work that I do. I just have a lot of practice and I'm very comfortable. As I say, like every class I teach is about the most politically contentious thing you can imagine. I'm just like all day long. It's like abortion, vaccine, race relations, like history of
That's
slavery.
Tuesday.
Yeah, that's just
So,
like what I do, And so I will kind of, I'm very like more so than like as a graduate, I'm just you're very practiced in it. You know, I'm like, do you want me to talk to your kids about sex? I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it right now. It's just like I'm very comfortable with it.
well, rock climbing.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so I think in that sense, it is in. Uh, I mean, we live in Appalachia. It's definitely a more white area. The university has a large international population, various places. A lot of students from West Africa and Ghana in particular, and faculty, because we have like a sister relationship with a Ghanaian university. But it is all of those qualifications aside, it's a definitely a more white area than like where I grew up, for instance. And so there'll be many contexts at the university or in town where, I'm one of, if not the only person who, isn't automatically identifiable as
Mhm.
white.
Yeah.
So it definitely will come up. And I think, but I think in part because not that I don't know if I don't like bring it up like, hey guys, I'm brown. Like I don't say it like that. But I think just like a kind of ease of, especially talking about the history of race in the United States. It's
Mhm.
something I study. It's something I think about, um, and I find sometimes in left liberal contexts for people who understand themselves to be white, race can feel like such a charged thing to
Mhm.
just bring forward in a conversation. Um, and I recognize that, but I feel like I practice doing it, and so I will, you know. Um, so yeah, it comes up, but it also comes up in humor. So that's one of the things that I have found a lot being in a multicultural context is that like a lot of people will talk about this, right? Is like it comes up in humor. So my younger brother lives in Athens and he actually used to live my husband built a tiny cabin at the bottom of our property.
Obviously.
Obviously he did. Well, first he designed and machined a sawmill and then he milled the wood for it and then he built the cabin. that's actually what happened. And so my brother, like you do. So my brother rented that from us for 3 years. So he actually my younger brother used to live on our property, and um, because he's my younger brother, you know, he spends his life like making fun of me and ridiculing me. And so a lot of like, you know, like jokes about being Filipino and like who is and who isn't in the family. My mom lives with us and she's the side of the family that's not Filipino. So it's like a lot of humor. I think a lot of people who have when they experience multiculturalism in ways that are really visible, I think like a lot of the ways that you sort of meld it is through humor. And so yeah, there's a lot of joking. And I would say in our friend group also, there's a lot of joking that will happen as like a way of kind of engaging with it, which I think is wonderful and like super healthy.
And that's so beautiful because your kids are also around the humor. And I mean, living in the South, I mean, if you're not funny, you're not gonna make it. I mean, there's so much to laugh. I mean, it's hot, it's humid. If you can't like laugh at yourself, you're done.
Yeah.
So yeah, humor is something that I know with our kids and our family, we're just constantly riffing on different things I do or Chessie does or our kids do.
Andre has never done this, but he always,
Oh,
before
no.
we had kids, would say, I'm going to have family meetings and say that only brown people can come.
I haven't done it yet, but there's been a couple times I'm like, you need to go.
Yeah, like you're gonna, yeah. My brother will sometimes.
You need to. You're not here. Mom's outside or whatever.
Yeah, like you know, only brown people. Oh, that's amazing. My brother will sometimes just like call Seth a colonizer, like in. He's like, "What's a colonizer?"
I recently heard that like in a TV show. Like there was like a rip. Someone said they're like, oh, that you're a colonizer. But it was the way the timing was like perfect. I never even.
Yeah, but it's like somehow with like affection. You're like,
yeah, it's like in the culture. I'm like, wow, we could just throw. Wow, I didn't know we.
Yeah,
got
what is
Here's
going
where we
on?
are.
House meeting. Brown people only.
Probably only. Sorry.
See the thing with our family is, so I'm half Filipino, and it's funny how you know, speaking about it here, like the way that things come about. My daughter, who's my oldest, has like the brightest blue eyes and like the most like porcelain skin you've ever seen. So like I like if like, you know, when it was just her, before my second was born, it would be like my mom and Seth and me and Indy. And I was like, I don't like this. That would be a hard situation to read. And people often assume that my mom is Seth's mom if they don't know. Um, Otherwise, you know, like our neighbor did for really long, I think for years. Like, because like he saw my mom and she's like, oh yeah, Seth's parents are coming over. And he's like, wait, I thought you were Seth's mom. She's like, no, I'm Myrna's mom. So it's funny because like I don't look coloring wise like my mom, but then my daughter doesn't coloring wise look like me. She looks like my mom, you know. So it's and this is why I think about race.
We've got Chessie has gotten some head swivels that are amazing walking through.
Well, we were primarily in a white area.
And everyone knew each other.
Right. And so they like similar to where you were, where everybody knows the situation. There's like, well, you're this, that's so and so's dad. So we all know what's happening.
Yeah.
We know what you guys did.
So now being in like our kids are in spaces that are like predominantly people of color
Mm-hmm.
at certain times. And so like our kids will walk in and then I'll walk in. Recently I've gotten
the whole room. Like 7-year-old girls are just 10-year-old girls are just like, what is that? And then they'll look at the kids and then I'll walk in like a couple minutes later and they're like, okay. All right. This is making sense to me now.
I dropped off one of our sons at day camp and then Andre picked him up and the camp director was like, she was like,
she went to my son. So I'm standing there and I'm standing there and she like, and I saw him in earshot and she like goes to my son and she's like, that guy behind me, is that your dad?
Is that your daddy?
And he's like, and I'm looking at him like, you better say yes. Like, I mean, this is a serious question. This person, if I'm not, like, there's gonna be a problem. And he's like, yeah. And it was cool because she was like, that's not the person that dropped you off. So I was like, they were strict. I mean, they were like, no, like the person that dropped you off, we gotta know, you know what I mean? Very strict. So it was awesome. But it was just hilarious because he was so confused. yeah, like, you're my dad, right? And I'm like, yeah, I'm your dad.
You're like, this isn't an existential question right now.
No,
This is just
no,
like a
no.
pragmatic. They
And
need to be
always say yes,
assured.
because
Yeah.
that woman could physically harm me. Like,
Yeah.
like,
Which, well done on her part, actually, right? Yeah.
so yeah, so you get to have, but you gotta like bring the humor into it in the life, and that's what keeps the whole conversation.
That's it's the two things, because I do think it can be a heavy experience to, like you're saying, to be like, my daughter and I do not share a skin tone.
Yeah.
And knowing personally that, like, especially come adolescence and as she moves through the world, she will have a different experience.
Yeah.
And that there are not things that I can counsel her on. I can listen, I can love. And like, bringing it back to community, it's like, and I need to have people outside of myself like you to be like, Myrna's had this experience, you know, like
aunties.
You got to have the aunties to be like,
Yeah.
have friends that have had this experience. There's people you can talk to, and I'm still your mother. But that is not, well, I would say that's not a situation that everyone experiences, right?
It is
a situation.
It is. And I think that, let me see how to say this. I think that the real challenge, I think, could be as a mother is like, you desire so much this sense of connection and help with your, let's say, daughter specifically, that you could almost unintentionally desire, unintentionally like indicate you want her to silence certain things about herself that are different than you, right? Because you don't want to feel this sense of difference. And I think I think that I think, if my mom were here, I think she would probably talk about that. It wasn't until I was much older, and like had spent time being an academic, that I had the vocabulary that could help both of us to see that she didn't always like it emphasized that I was, ethnically or racially different from her, because she didn't like this sense of like difference between us, right? And this sense of like, oh, my experience is different, mom, because I am different than you, which I think that like that is that's I think a baseline parenting experience with anyone, but for it to be so politically and contextually charged, right? I think that like adds a layer to it. And so I think it was when I was much older that my mom and I have a really wonderful relationship, and we're, able to talk about things like this, for me to be able to articulate like, you have to sit in this space where there are experiences that I have had or continue to have that you don't have access to. And it doesn't mean that you're limited as a mother. It actually can be the opposite, right? I think like there's almost this like, I almost think of it as like, I think that is actually true for all mothers and daughters, but that when you have this intensification of the difference, you might have to reckon with it more directly. Like it could be a gift, actually, is maybe what I'm saying. But so yeah, we'll revisit this when all our children are teenagers.
Oh
yeah,
boy.
I was gonna say, given your experience, like growing up in a multicultural family, you being a multicultural person, and now also raising one, like what are you kind of like highlighted probably one piece like with your relationship with your mom, but like what are you doing differently that like you feel like was like, oh, this is serving like little Myrna, this is serving little Myrna as I raise my own family.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing I would say is that being okay saying things out loud, like just saying the thing out loud as it feels like it's possible, and in the ways that kids can not handle it. I don't mean by handle it, but in ways that just feel like organic to the situation. So I would say, for instance, like, the analogy I would make is like when people talk about sex with their kids, they often imagine it as like, there's be this one time and I sit them down and it's like, this is where babies come from, right? And it's like intense and heavy and they're like probably uncomfortable and you've probably done it too late. So they probably already had sex, it's like a lot of things are going on there. And instead I feel like if somebody asked me like, when did you first talk to your kids about sex? I'm like, it would be hard for me to identify a moment, because from the time I spoke to them, I talked to them about their bodies and their body parts and, menstruation and like, when I was pregnant, like it just like you just say the things out loud, right? It's like my daughter is like, well, how did a baby get inside of you? I'm like, well, your dad and I had sex, and that's like one of the ways that a baby gets inside of you. And she's like, okay, she's 3, she doesn't care much more, right? But just like, just even saying that out loud feels shocking. But so I think that it's a similar thing, right? Of like, you know, if someone were to ask me like, well, when did you sit your kids down to talk to them about the history of race relations in the United States? Again, I don't like, there's not a moment. It's like as things come up in context, you know, like there was like you know, an event with like a community event with police recently, like celebrating police. And so my daughter was like, why aren't we going? And I'm like, well, you know, again, we talk about like there's a history of relationships with police in this country. And, you know, these are some of my feelings about it. And so it's not my first choice to go have ice cream, but like I can also see that this is like a healing thing for communities, right? Like I just say all that out loud to my daughter. And I think that when I was telling stories about earlier in my life, I think I was highlighting moments where I remember being much older and somebody saying something out loud, right? Like that professor saying out loud about um, you know, labor and race relations in Southern California. And I was like 18, you know, but I'd obviously experienced that from being a kid. And I feel like I think there are ways instead to imagine that it becomes more like a tapestry you're weaving with your kids, right? Where there are these like moments where it makes sense to just say a little bit of something out loud, right? Like you're probably not going to talk about like sexual kinks with your 3-year-old, right? That's just like probably not super relevant to them, you know, but like you could talk to them like, oh, like that's your penis. That's like a reasonable thing to say to a 3-year-old. And I think kind of similarly, you know, with race relations, it's like, oh, you know, like I'm trying to think of like an example that I've used of like, oh, like, you know, mommy, everyone who is like, you know, working at that restaurant is speaking Spanish. Like, why? You know, like, okay, you know, like, or what language are they speaking? That's actually probably the way that they've asked it. I'm like, oh, like they're speaking Spanish. It's like a lot of people who have like immigrated here and, you know, are working like speak Spanish for these reasons. The other thing I noticed though also with kids is like they stop listening pretty quickly too.
Oh,
So fast.
30 seconds.
Super quickly. So I think it's also just this thing of like I think people are like worried, right? Like you say something out loud and then they'll like, you know, they'll keep pressing you. And sometimes they do, but a lot of times they're just like, oh, whatever, you know. So I think that it's but I also recognize, again, I was joking, I have a lot of practice saying things out loud. And I think that what you all are doing, right, in some ways is like practice together for saying things out loud for, you know, for people who don't like get to teach college students all the time. And so it's like, you know, what I do. So yeah, that's the main thing I would think. Plus a lot of outside time. Like my kids are basically outside constantly.
Good. Well, that's beautiful. And I think I just want to say thank you so much I mean, I've known you for years, and I don't know, every time I walk away from these conversations, I feel like I've learned so much, you know, and I've learned things about you that we've never talked about, and also just like your wisdom and your journey. And I know this is a conversation I'll be thinking about for a long time and probably want to follow up on as well.
Always.
And so just thank you for sharing your journey with us.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It's
Oh,
incredible.
you guys are so kind to ask me about myself. It's so, yeah, I feel so honored to be a part of this. And yeah, I'm so impressed and excited with what you all are doing. It's like creating things, I think, is the thing.
And Myrna, one more time for everyone, what's the name of your book? Where can we get it? And we'll put some links too also.
Yeah. So you can get it wherever books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Thrift Books. It's published by Johns Hopkins University Press. I could even give you a discount code for the press website because it's an academic book because it's expensive. So it's called Criticizing Science. And then the subtitle is Stephen Jay Gould and the Struggle for American Democracy.
Girl,
I will be reading it, and I will be calling you at 8 o'clock to be like, explain this to me, please.
I would say it's like a little bit more of a page turner than it sounds. Like,
oh no,
yeah.
we're going for it. We're doing it. That's awesome.
Yeah, one of my colleagues like read the intro and he's like, "You talk about yourself a lot in this," and I was like, "Yeah, like you like yeah,
Oh, I'm
it's a
excited. I'm
yeah,
excited
yeah,
to get it. This
yeah,
has been
yeah,
great. Yeah, so
yeah,
please go out there, pick that up. So thank you so much for being with
Oh,
us, and we really enjoy you.
Love
yeah.
you.
We
Thank
definitely
you
will
so
do a
much.
follow-up.
Bye all.
Bye.